Hello, members of the Medical Association. Welcome to our 23rd online meeting this year. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Huang Shiwei, Director of the Department of Urology at National Taiwan University Yunnan Branch, to give a presentation on the current state of organ transplantation. Dr. Huang graduated from the Department of Medicine at National Taiwan University and is my classmate. Therefore, I am here on behalf of the chairman to deliver this speech. Hello, members of the Medical Association. Thank you for your hard work this morning at the clinic, your lunch break, and this video conference. First of all, on behalf of Chairman Lai Chunliang, Chairman, welcome our two guests today. The first is Ms. Wang Shumei, currently the chairperson of the Taiwan International Organ Transplant Care Association. She has over 20 years of experience in clinical medicine and international pharmaceutical companies, which we'll discuss later. Our speaker today is Dr. Huang Shiwei, Director of Urology. He graduated from the Department of Medicine at National Taiwan University and is currently a full-time assistant professor of urology at the Department of Medicine, College of Medicine, National Taiwan University, as well as the Director of Urology at National Taiwan University Yunnan Branch. We thank him for coming all the way from Yunnan. Now, Chairman Wang, would you please say a few words to us first?
Thank you, everyone. We are very grateful for this opportunity to discuss this topic. We have been paying attention to this issue for a very long time. Since 2000, many Taiwanese patients have gone abroad for organ transplants. We have seen that the waiting time for patients is very short. Before 2007, the number of Taiwanese patients receiving organ transplants abroad was even greater than the number receiving them domestically. Many people are not clear about where these organs come from. After more than 20 years of continuous information, people are becoming increasingly aware of the problems encountered in overseas organ transplant. Of course, many doctors are too busy to learn about this issue, but there are now internationally recognized laws and numerous laws to sanction and punish such illegal organ transplants. Therefore, I want to say that this opportunity to help everyone understand this issue is one that requires our collective attention. Today, I would like to invite Dr. Huang to explain. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yang, Dr. Huang, and all the member physicians. Today, we will mainly discuss humanitarian care and the ethics and regulations of overseas transplantation. In recent years, you have seen many controversial issues regarding overseas transplantation, mainly related to the CCP's involvement in forced organ harvesting, organs from prisoners of conscience, and so on. You may have some questions about these issues, so I will give you a brief explanation. I have been concerned about this issue for over 20 years. Since 2001, I have noticed some patients from National Taiwan University going to China for organ transplant surgery, and I have been researching this issue since 2006. When we talk about medical ethics, we start with the Hippocratic Oath, and then move on to the concept of rights after World War II, due to the human experiments conducted on Jews by Nazi doctors. This led to the formation of the ethical framework we have today, which includes 4 major ethical principles. We all take an oath when we become physicians. Our physician's oath is mainly derived from the Geneva Declaration after World War II. One of its clauses states that even under threat, I will not use my medical knowledge to violate humanity. This was in response to the actions of Nazi doctors during World War II. Therefore, organ transplantation is also established within this ethical framework. From the very first day of this procedure, we have imbued it with a high value representing human solidarity, the joy of a life's death leading to a new life. Therefore, we not only value the patient's joy, but also how that life ends, whether it conforms to transplant ethics. While organ transplantation is developing globally, mainland China is also developing its own. However, unlike Western countries, it lacks their ethical framework. They operate under communism. So from the outset, it is collectivist. They emphasize that your money belongs to the state, your land belongs to the state, and your organs and corpses belong to the state. The only difference is whose organs the state requisitions for transplant surgeries. Therefore, we see that from the very beginning of their transplantation efforts, starting in 1978, they directly requisitioned organs from executed prisoners. They had no organ transplant regulations, no donation system, and no concepts like brain death or heart death. What we see from the outside world is a provisional regulation issued in 1984 by 6 ministries regarding the use of the corpses or organs of executed prisoners. Specifically, how to use organs from executed prisoners. However, we all know that organs are far from sufficient to meet the needs of any single country. Even in the United States, a major transplant country, there is still a significant shortage. So what can be done? Most governments probably turn a blind eye to their citizens undergoing organ transplants overseas. Starting in the 1990s, Taiwanese people began traveling to mainland China for organ transplants, following in the footsteps of people from Hong Kong and Macau due to shared language and culture. Initially, the number was small, but it suddenly surged to over 100 kidney transplant recipients in 2000. The first peak occurred in 2002, followed by a decline in 2003 due to SARS, and then another peak in 2005. Liver transplants, very rare in the 1990s, began to increase rapidly from 2000 onwards. In 2005 alone, approximately 500 Taiwanese patients traveled to China for liver and kidney transplants. Let me tell you two stories to illustrate why people flock to China for transplant surgeries. This is about a 35-year-old male patient who decided to have a kidney transplant in China in September 2003 because he was young and needed to work, and dialysis was very difficult at that time. Through arrangements made by doctors in Taiwan, his information was sent to the First People's Hospital, affiliated with Shanghai Jiao Tong University in China. They said they have found a high-quality kidney with a matching HLA-3 blood type, and he could have the surgery in China. When he and his wife arrived in China, they were told that evening that they would wait for the kidney transplant surgery the next day. When the kidney arrived the next day, a blood sample was taken for the final cross-match. This case was unusual. His cross-match was positive, so he couldn't receive the organ for transplantation. Otherwise, it would cause hyperacute rejection, and the kidney was discarded. The doctor told him to wait for the next kidney. He waited 2 weeks, and a total of 4 kidneys were delivered, but all of them had positive cross-matches, so he did not have the surgery because he needed to work. He decided to return to Taiwan first. By March of the following year, feeling ready, he took a long leave from his company. The Taiwanese doctor helped him send his medical records to a hospital in China, where they found a kidney with a HLA-5 matched. He went to China to prepare for surgery, but the next day, the same thing happened again. When the kidney arrived, a blood sample was taken, and the cross-match was positive again. This kidney was discarded. The doctor suggested he undergo plasmapheresis to remove the antibodies from his blood. But the Taiwanese doctor told him not to, as there were plenty of kidneys available in China, and he should continue waiting. He would definitely get one. He waited another 3 weeks. And finally, with the 4th kidney, the cross-match was negative, so he successfully underwent surgery and returned to Taiwan, although it was the first affiliated hospital of National Jiao Tong University. Its transplant department was outsourced to the Fuzhou General Hospital of Nanjing Military Region, and the doctor informed him that these organs came from executed prisoners. This is a story about a broker who specialized in brokering for hospitals in the Guangzhou Economic Development Zone Hospital. He tells a story to illustrate the situation at the time. He said that once hospital staff went to retrieve donor kidneys, but a blizzard delayed their flight. So when the kidneys arrived at the hospital, there were 8 kidneys in total. The doctors examined them and found that the quality of these 8 kidneys was poor due to prolonged cold ischemia, so they discarded them, saying they would wait for the next batch of 8 kidneys to arrive. At that time, everyone referred to kidneys as kidneys, and the official source of organs was death row inmates. HLA-3 matching was required at least. At that time, 1 kidney cost 5,000 RMB. We all know that they had a supply bank of death row inmates, organized by province. So if they couldn't find one in one province, they had to go to another, which took more time back then. They called it stir-fried kidneys. If a kidney wasn't of good quality, it was discarded because there were too many. At that time, they went to hospitals or transplant centers operated by the People's Liberation Army, PLAAD. At that time, a kidney transplant cost about $6,000 to $8,000 for a Chinese person, but it cost $28,000 for a Taiwanese person, which is about 1,000,000 NT dollars. This phenomenon isn't limited to Taiwan. It is prevalent in Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, Singapore, the Middle East, and even Western countries. Since 2000, there has been a surge in organ transplant surgeries in China. The number of transplant clinics in China has skyrocketed from over 100 to over 800. Brokers almost universally know to find hospitals affiliated with the People's Liberation Army PLA or hospitals run by PLA doctors to perform transplants, ensuring organ availability. The common explanation is that the organs come from executed prisoners. Chinese doctors explain that there are two types of executions in China: immediate execution and a 2-year reprieve. Most executed prisoners receive a 2-year reprieve, allowing for organ transplants to be performed according to the patient's needs. At that time, a kidney or liver cost 5,000 RMB. Chinese doctors promote their organ transplant surgeries at various events, from international conferences to private gatherings. Unlike other less developed countries, China can perform not only kidney transplants, but also liver, lung, heart, pancreas, cornea, and even multiple organ transplants. They are a major transplant nation. At that time, it wasn't just patients worldwide, but also those in mainland China. I remember 2 stories. One story, as everyone knows, involves a large number of dialysis patients in Taiwan. A manufacturer of dialysis medical devices wanted to expand into China. Feeling the Taiwanese market was saturated, they conducted market research in China in 2006 and reported that Taiwan had 500 dialysis centers and 50,000 dialysis patients. However, their research showed that China only had about 100 dialysis centers with 50,000 dialysis patients, which seemed very strange. The brokers said that Chinese people didn't do dialysis. They only needed kidney transplants. At that time, many underground hospitals in China were performing transplant surgeries. The 2 famous hospitals, the Tianjin Organ Transplant Center and the Shanghai Changzheng Hospital, specifically mentioned the chaos in China's organ transplant industry. They said that 10 to 20% of their liver transplant patients were from failed liver transplants in township hospitals, similar to regional hospitals, requiring an emergency second transplant. Therefore, there were many underground hospitals in China at that time performing transplant surgeries. So the quality and medical care were questionable. Against this backdrop, China had a continuous supply of organs, and its organ transplant success rate was quite good. However, many underground hospitals performed transplants. So when a legislator had a successful kidney transplant in China, he wanted to promote Taiwan health insurance reimbursement for Taiwanese people doing kidney transplants in mainland China. At that time, our Minister of Health, Chen Qianjian, expressed his disagreement. His first point was that there were many unqualified hospitals performing kidney transplants in mainland China, and the success rate in China was unclear. That was the first point. Secondly, it might involve the issue of organ trafficking, but because Taiwan had used organs from executed prisoners, we didn't think using organs from executed prisoners was a major problem at the time. We can see many celebrities going to China for liver and kidney transplants, returning with great success and making headlines for their transformed lives. At that time, the biggest controversy in the medical community was how they obtained organs from executed prisoners. Because in Taiwan, doctors knew we had obtained organs from executed prisoners, but we encountered technical problems. We couldn't meet the requirements for death donor rule. So Taiwanese doctors often ask Chinese doctors how they obtained organs. We all know their methods are cruel, but we haven't witnessed how cruel they are firsthand. There was a doctor named Wang who, at a hearing in the United States in July 2001, recounted his story of skinning death row inmates. He gave an example. Once, when he was at the execution ground to collect skin, he injected the prisoner with 10 milliliters of heparin. The prisoner asked why he was being injected, and the police explained that it was a tranquilizer intended to calm him during the execution. The prisoner repeatedly thanked the government. A shot rang out, and the prisoner collapsed, writhing in pain. The doctor consulted the execution ground commander, who said that was enough. The prisoner was dead. They loaded the prisoner into an ambulance, and a urologist quickly removed his kidneys. Because the prisoner still had a pulse and was breathing, they asked if a second shot was needed. The court personnel said no, the kidneys were gone, and there was no need to waste bullets. Dr. Wang then collected the skin and corneas. Finally, the body was cremated. He recounted that he had skinned over 100 death row inmates. Later, he fled to the United States and told his story. Despite this controversy, Taiwan still lacks organs, so many patients still travel to China for transplants. This matter continued until the 9th of March 2006, when Peter, a senior media professional from a Japanese-Chinese joint venture television station, went to the United States to expose a fascist concentration camp in Sujiaton, Shenyang, Liaoning province, which held 6,000 Falun Gong practitioners. He claimed that the practitioners' organs were harvested while they were still alive, sold, and then cremated. About a week later, a woman named Annie, who worked at the Liaoning Provincial Hospital of Integrated Traditional Chinese and Western Medicine and was an accountant, stated that her husband, a neurosurgeon, had harvested corneas from 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners between 2001 and 2003. Other doctors harvested livers and kidneys, and the bodies were then cremated during this harvesting process. Her husband experienced increasing pain, so they decided to flee China. During their escape, they also survived assassination attempts. After this matter was revealed, everyone was suddenly shocked. It also brought the source of organs for transplantation in China to the forefront for the first time. We gradually learned about the true nature of organ transplantation in China. The Criminal Procedure Law of the People's Republic of China specifically mentions that the death penalty includes immediate execution and a 2-year reprieve. Immediate execution means being shot within a week. This is very swift. A 2-year reprieve means that if no crime is committed during 2 years in prison, the sentence is commuted to life imprisonment. In particular, the court also mentioned that in 2001, they decided to change the method of execution to lethal injection, allowing death row inmates to apply for a lethal injection instead of shooting. Therefore, many death row inmates applied for lethal injection because they hoped that any residual toxins in their bodies would prevent organ transplantation or donation. As a result, since 2001-2002, the number of organs from death row inmates in China has become very low. Therefore, we can see that many celebrities who were sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve for corruption often had their sentences commuted to life imprisonment. This is exemplified by Bo Xilai's Jiyu Kailai, sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve. Therefore, Amnesty International's annual statistics show a discrepancy between death sentences and executions in China, primarily because part of death sentences are suspended for 2 years. After this incident, the true nature of organ transplantation in China was gradually revealed, and we learned why the organs were from People's Liberation Army PLA from the very beginning. China's organ transplantation system was managed by the PLA, and its core administrative body was the military. They had their own theoretical framework derived from communism. They followed the regulations of the Central Military Commission of the Communist Party of China 1962 regarding the handling of the bodies of reactionary elements. At that time, the biggest reactionary elements were the Kuomintang KMT members. According to the needs of national and socialist development, reactionary elements could be subjected to corresponding revolutionary treatment. They were required to establish resource recycling systems in every province to collect the bodies of these reactionary elements for disposal. During the Cultural Revolution, this was mainly for consumption, and later various projects and production operations were established. In 1984, organ transplantation from these reactionary elements was legalized, so the options were either direct organ harvesting and cremation, or fake execution, followed by transplantation and cremation. After 1992, the bodies of these reactionary elements entered various industrial raw materials because human tissue is important in many fields, especially medical field. Human body components have become a crucial raw material. So from the very beginning, China's organ transplantation program used organs from reactionary elements to satisfy the needs of China's elite and wealthy. After 2000, with an abundance of organs, it could satisfy not only China, but also the wealthy and powerful people worldwide, while also making transplant surgery accessible to ordinary Chinese citizens at a relatively low cost. In Taiwan and South Korea, many of the intermediaries are medical professionals, while in other countries, this business is largely run by Chinese embassies and gang groups. Only after this incident did the dark secrets slowly come to light. We all say that organ procurement and organ transplantation are two separate systems. In China, they also have two separate systems with different meanings. Their organ harvesting is one system, including arrests, imprisonment, and the People's Liberation Army play doctors harvesting organs. That is one system. The other system is organ transplantation, including intermediaries, patients, and then transplant surgeries performed in people's hospitals, run by the PLA or military hospitals. This is the system that everyone knows about. After this incident, two Canadians, David Matas and David Kilgowan, a Canadian human rights lawyer, the other the Canadian director of the Asia Pacific Division, both with legal backgrounds, conducted an independent investigation. In their 2006 report, they specifically listed 52 pieces of circumstantial evidence. They believed that, based on official CCP data, there were 41,500 cases of organs with unknown sources. From their evidence, they discovered that the CCP's Political and Legal Affairs Commission system was harvesting organs from Falun Gong practitioners on a large scale. This report was initially intended for Western countries to see. Of course, under international scrutiny, and after the release of the investigation report, the CCP also made some responses. Mainly, in 2006, they made 4 points. First, they publicly admitted that all their organs came from executed prisoners. Second, they acknowledged that a large number of underground hospitals in China performed transplant surgeries, so they implemented entry requirements, reducing the number of transplant hospitals from over 600 to 800 to 157 after 2007, allowing only top-tier hospitals to perform transplant surgeries. Third, the immediate execution of the death penalty was transferred to the Supreme Court. Regarding the number of organ transplants and executed prisoners, they stated that they could not provide statistics because they did not have such statistical reports. At that time, Taiwan Ministry of Health and Welfare also quickly introduced an ethical code, mainly hoping that all medical personnel would not participate in any form of mediation. Following this, the medical community issued the Istanbul Declaration, revised the World Health Organization guidelines, and the Madrid Resolution. Starting in 2007, there was also a surge in calls to boycott CCP transplant research papers, etc. In the past, there have been many controversies surrounding overseas organ transplantation. The Istanbul Declaration primarily aims to eliminate these controversies by comprehensively banning the commercialization of organ transplantation and organ transplant tourism. Most importantly, it seeks to extend the jurisdiction of each country to the overseas activities of its citizens. The Madrid Resolution primarily aims to establish a framework whereby each country must solve its own organ shortage problem, avoiding beggar-thy-neighbor policies. In Taiwan, we can see that since 2007, the number of overseas organ transplants has indeed decreased from a peak of approximately 500 to 150 people per year going to China for liver and kidney transplants. Of course, besides this ethical framework and international attention, I think there are three main changes. First, of course, is the transplant hospitals, because in China, only top-tier hospitals can perform transplant surgeries for foreign patients. Many intermediary hospitals have been reshuffled. Second, the cost of organs has increased significantly. In the early days, a kidney cost 5,000 RMB, but after 2007, it rose sharply to 100,000 to 200,000 RMB. For Taiwanese people, a kidney transplant used to cost NT $1 million, and a liver transplant NT $2 million. After 2007, the cost rose to NT $2 million, and now it is over NT $3.5 million for a kidney transplant. The same applies to liver transplants. Just 1 year later, in 2007, the price jumped to NT $4 million, and now it is probably NT $7 or $8 million. The third point concerns organ harvesting. We've gradually discovered that the practice has spread from Falun Gong practitioners to other ethnic groups, including Uyghurs, underground Christians, and many international religious groups, all reporting on forced organ harvesting. The second source is the collusion between many criminal organizations and underground groups in mainland China. Whether through deception or enticement, more and more young people are being sold into organ trafficking. The third point is the extensive reporting by Chinese media of beggars and homeless people being suddenly murdered, their organs harvested, and their bodies dumped. In the Western countries, the Convention Against Trafficking in Human Organs, introduced by the European Council in 2014, primarily aims to encourage all EU member states to use criminal penalties to punish the harvesting of organs from living people or the brokerage of organs. A major change occurred during this period, 2012 to 2015 in China, starting with the investigations of Huang Lijian, Bo Xilai, and Zhou Yongkang, which seemed to signal a shift in China's approach. Huang Jiefu publicly stated this in interviews with CCTV and Phoenix Television in 2015. He described organ transplantation in China with three phrases. Many things shouldn't be explained too clearly. Some things you'll understand if you think about them. The third phrase is, you know what I mean? Before 2012, he addressed questions about organ sourcing, transplant volume, and organ harvesting from executed prisoners, emphasizing that everything in China is ethical. In 2015, he specifically mentioned that organ transplantation in mainland China is a dirty profit chain. He specifically stated that all organs were provided by Zhou Yongkang. Who is Zhou Yongkang? Everyone knows that from 2002 onwards, he was the Minister of Public Security and Secretary of the Political and Legal Affairs Commission. During Jiang Zemin's persecution of Falun Gong, Zhou Yongkang was the main executor. Therefore, he also said that all organs were provided by Zhou Yongkang. Regarding the number of transplants, he told you that many things shouldn't be explained too clearly. This country is a dirty profit chain, full of secrets. When a CCTV reporter asked him how organs were harvested, Huang Jiefu specifically mentioned that he was part of the recipient group and not involved in the donor group. He said he only witnessed it once, and after that, he was traumatized. The reporter asked why he was traumatized, and he replied that many things shouldn't be explained too clearly. Doctors, after all, are there to save lives. He said, go and see organ harvesting, and you'll understand. Do you understand? He also stated that China needs to change, with two major changes. One is China's promotion of the Belt and Road Initiative and the Chinese model of organ transplantation. The second is China's establishment of an organ donation system. During this period, our government also amended our regulations on human organ transplantation, mainly with two objectives. First, we hope to prohibit or reduce overseas transplant tourism and criminalize intermediaries. Second, we require mandatory registration for those returning from overseas transplants. So from this point on, when we logged into the system, we had a very clear number in those 4 years from July 2015 to July 2019. There were a total of 360 registered overseas transplants, of which 95% were still performed in mainland China. We registered which hospital and which doctor performed the organ transplant surgery. But we found some problems with the registration. Some information was inconsistent. Also, Taiwanese people started going to Cambodia for organ transplants. Mainland China also claims that their transplantation system is changing, declaring to foreign countries that they are changing what? Interestingly, they explicitly stated in their donation system that their OPOs are different from those in other countries, like Spain and the United States. They are not independent legal entities. They are based on medical institutions, with each hospital acting as its own OPO. Therefore, they specifically mentioned that their organ allocation supervision and management system uses information technology is government, industry autonomous, and hospital self-inspected. This means that from that time on, their system was established so that each hospital finds organs, reports organ transplants, and reviews them themselves. As for how to report the information, each hospital is responsible for that. They need to understand and know how to report effectively. So from that time on, we can understand how it works from a few things. One of the most famous examples is Zhang Shusen. From Zhejiang University, one of his papers was retracted by a journal, mainly because it mentioned 536 ethically compliant liver transplants. This number was questioned. After the questioning, Huang pointed out that Zhejiang University only had 113 cases in the system, and the paper was fabricated. Simply put, they only logged 113 cases in the system, but the paper published 563 liver transplants. So after his paper was retracted, the journal stated that it would never accept his paper again. Secondly, you'll find that mainland Chinese media have started reporting on many hospitals engaging in fake organ donations and actual organ theft. Hospitals are colluding to steal organs. However, recently, in 2024 to 2025, 3 incidents have occurred that have given us a better understanding of what is happening with organ transplantation in China. The first is about Luo Shuaiyu, an intern in the organ transplant department of Xiangya No. 2 Hospital. He was murdered in 2024. Jumping from a building. After his suicide, his parents publicly stated that he had collected a lot of hospital information on his computer. Luo Shuaiyu revealed 2 things. First, the hospital's emergency room trauma ward was called a morgue, where many people were brought in under false pretenses, and their organs were harvested. He discovered that these people were arranged to be brought into the hospital for organ harvesting. Second, he was assigned to find organs from 12 children, which he refused. They needed organs from 12 children. He was eventually killed for collecting data, and it was later discovered that he wasn't the only one. His parents publicly stated that several interns had committed suicide during that period. Secondly, we can see that a woman recently went to Germany and stated that her organs were harvested at the first affiliated hospital of Zhengzhou University. She went to the hospital for a cold, and the doctor advised her to be hospitalized for examination and treatment. During her hospitalization, she was told she had a fungal infection and needed a chest tube. Later, during surgery, while the chest tube was inserted, her entire left lung was removed. Only later did she discover that the hospital had lied to her because they needed her organs. After failing to get help in China, she fled to Germany to tell her story and her escape. The third example is a nurse from a hospital in Wuhan, Hubei province. She publicly stated that in China, every large hospital, from the moment a patient enters for a minor illness or a checkup, begins testing them with a blood sample. Once an organ is selected, they might use various pretexts to harvest it. The entire hospital system cooperates with doctors to remove organs, and the patient might then believe they are simply ill. She specifically mentioned that the entire industry chain has expanded from judicial donors to all hospital patients. A single patient undergoing a checkup or health examination might end up having their organs harvested. The entire hospital is complicit, from the party secretary and hospital director down to all the doctors. Everyone is involved. Therefore, in recent years, we have seen many news reports from mainland China, and Taiwan also frequently reports on missing persons. So today, whenever a citizen or child goes missing in mainland China, their parents begin to worry that their organs have been harvested. For hospitals in mainland China, organ transplantation has always been their most important revenue-generating department. Many hospitals specifically mention that organ transplantation revenue is their most important source of income. They all have publicly available prices. Another change is that, starting in 2015, mainland China also began to expand organ transplantation to Belt and Road countries. 2020 marked the 6th China Belt and Road Organ Transplantation Development Conference, extending organ transplantation services to countries like Myanmar and Cambodia. Consequently, we began to see outbreaks of forced organ harvesting in neighboring countries. This includes Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and many other countries where organs are sold to China and Cambodia for harvesting. In 2020, in Western countries, Sir Geoffrey Nice QC published an investigative report. He was the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, prosecuting the dictator of Yugoslavia. He has spent a year and a half conducting this investigation from 2018 to 2020. The 160-page investigative report primarily targets the CCP's organ harvesting practices. It states that the CCP has committed crimes against humanity by harvesting organs from living Falun Gong practitioners on a large scale. As a prosecutor, he believes this report is sufficient to prosecute Beijing in the International Criminal Court. However, prosecuting Beijing in the ICC requires the consent of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which the CCP would absolutely not agree to. Nevertheless, the report has been widely cited by international organizations and governments worldwide due to its credibility. This report, in particular, offers a glimpse into the situation in Western countries. One woman featured in the report is Yufei Di, a journalist well known in Taiwanese media circles. She is European, born in Hong Kong, and speaks fluent Mandarin. From 2010 to 2017, she was the New York Times Beijing correspondent. In her testimony to the Chinese court and Senais in 2019, she specifically mentioned that her investigation revealed the CCP's use of organs from prisoners of conscience, primarily Falun Gong practitioners, is a well-established fact, at least within the medical community. She found that the CCP's so-called December 2014 ban on involuntary organ donation may have been ineffective, or even untrue, merely a deception of Western countries. Most notably, she specifically mentioned the New York Times' strong dissatisfaction with her investigations. And in 2017, the New York Times, disregarding the advice of its regional editors, decided not to promote her. She resigned from the New York Times in June 2017 because the newspaper did not want her to investigate any allegations of organ harvesting by the Chinese Communist Party. Her investigative report and testimony presented to the criminal court and Senais offer a glimpse into the attitudes of some media companies in Western countries. A special mention should be made of Michael Pillsbury, who visited China with Nixon when he was only in his early 20s. He was initially considered a staunch supporter of Beijing, a scholar, very pro-Beijing. However, after 2000, he discovered something. In his book, Find a Centennial Marathon, he specifically mentioned extensive training of Chinese scholars and experts by Western countries. They divided the Chinese Communist Party into doves and hawks. The doves were mostly scholars and experts who had studied in the US, Europe, and Australia. The hawks were those who inherited the Communist Party's legacy. They believed these doves were China's future hope and associated with them, considering the hawks inflexible and not the mainstream. Later, after 2000, the US gradually realized that the hawks were actually influencing US policy, while the doves were being used to deceive the US. Therefore, starting in 2007, the US political and intelligence communities began to believe that the US needed to change its policy towards China. The real change began with Trump in 2016. However, when the US political and intelligence circles began to feel the need for change, they suddenly discovered that the business, media, and academic communities were unwilling to change because everyone was moving towards China and no one wanted to change. So, as I mentioned, the ethical framework for organ transplantation in mainland China is quite different from ours. The Communist Party has neither a Western nor a traditional Eastern ethical framework. We know that traditional China had the Confucian physician, meaning you had to become a Confucian scholar before becoming a Confucian physician, like the female physician in Daizhangjun. In Western countries, many doctors were missionaries or monks. The Mao Zedong era provided the best explanation of Chinese ethics. He said that Chinese medical ethics was about saving lives and practicing revolutionary humanitarianism. This was their medical ethics. Therefore, Mao Zedong often mentioned the issue of 9 fingers versus 1 finger, how to view socialism in the medical field, like organ transplantation. He said that developing organ transplantation was correct. All 9 of our methods were correct. Only 1 was wrong. Don't emphasize that 1 finger. Just like organ transplantation, we emphasize our technology and our outcomes, not whose organ is sacrificed for the transplant surgery. In mainland China, we know that many doctors aspire to join the Communist Party. Therefore, for doctors, what truly guides them is not medical ethics, but the entire party. We can see that the Communist Party oath specifically mentions that they must keep party secrets, carry out party decisions, fight for communism for life, sacrifice everything, and never betray the party. Therefore, within hospitals, the party committee and party secretary firmly control the doctors. So in recent years, it is not just Dr. Huang we just mentioned. There is also Onwo Todai, a doctor from Xinjiang, who also participated in organ harvesting. His story was mentioned in the European Parliament in 2012. Including Dr. Zhang Zhe, an intern at the Shenyang Army General Hospital, who recently came to Taiwan and also shared his story of participating in organ harvesting. They all specifically mentioned that for them, they were carrying out tasks assigned to them by the party, and they had no right to refuse. Moreover, they had to keep it a secret for life. So in their process of leaving China, they all faced the process of fleeing and being hunted down. Before 1999, China's organ sources were primarily death row inmates. However, it was later discovered that they were mostly political prisoners and prisoners of conscience. From 2000 to 2006, the main source was Falun Gong practitioners. By 2007, the source had gradually spread beyond Falun Gong practitioners to other religious groups, ordinary people, and the organ trade. By 2015, young people and hospital patients had become a significant source. Following Sir John Nicey's investigative report, the World Medical Association issued a special statement in 2020 on preventing and combating organ transplant crimes. We no longer consider this merely a violation of medical ethics. It is a criminal act related to organ transplantation and how to prevent and combat. It is crucial. Therefore, in 2011, some international human rights groups issued a World Declaration on combating and preventing live organ harvesting. The main point was that they believed legislation should be enacted to severely punish the crime of live organ harvesting, an atrocity that is difficult to imagine for humanity and the medical community. Early legislative movements focused on amending organ transplant laws, but in 2022, Canada also passed a bill to combat the illegal harvesting and trafficking of organs. The US House of Representatives passed a bill to stop forced organ harvesting in 2023. The 2004 US Falun Gong Protection Act also specifically addressed forced organ harvesting, including freezing the assets of those involved, banning them from entering the US, and imposing criminal penalties. These two bills are currently being debated in the US Senate. Once passed and signed by Trump, they will become US domestic law. In conclusion, I want to summarize that the biggest change in modern medical ethics was the inclusion of the concept of human rights. After World War II, we specifically mentioned never again. When summarizing why the Nazi genocide of Jews occurred, ignorance and indifference were particularly noteworthy. Our ignorance of Nazi dictatorship and its brutality, and the fact that humanity is extremely indifferent to its victims, is why Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s tombstone specifically mentions, in the beginning day, he mentioned that the Nazis persecuted everyone: communists, social democrats, trade unionists, Jews, etc. And because he wasn't one of them, he chose to remain silent until the very end. When the Nazis arrested him, no one spoke up for him anymore. Organ transplantation in mainland China is somewhat similar. From the beginning, when Falun Gong practitioners were subjected to large-scale organ harvesting, everyone remained silent. Many Chinese people thought, "I just don't want to be a Falun Gong practitioner," without thinking too much about it. Later, it gradually spread to other ethnic groups. And today, many hospital patients are having their organs harvested. Suddenly, everyone feels as if they are experiencing it firsthand, as if they feel danger. This is a gradual process. In short, ignorance and indifference have caused this tragedy. I mainly want to share with you today the evolution of overseas organ transplantation in mainland China over the past 20 years. Thank you for your attention.
We thank Director Huang for giving us such a wonderful speech. Although the content was quite heavy, do any members have any questions they would like Director Huang to answer? Please feel free to ask your questions online. if you don't have any questions right now, I'd like to ask one first. I've recently received many messages from friends saying that Jet Li supposedly underwent an organ transplant, and then suddenly claiming that he doesn't have any wounds or incisions on his body. I wonder if Director Huang has any research on this.
Let me tell you, there are two extremely bloody fields in mainland China: organ transplantation and regenerative medicine. How do they do it? I want to tell you a story. We know that Dr. Zhang Zhe came to Taiwan recently. He had participated in live organ harvesting. He specifically told me a story when he was an intern at the Shenyang Army General Hospital, working in the urology department. He was involved in live organ harvesting. He was terrified afterward, so he dared not go into surgery or stay at the PA Army General Hospital. Later, he went to an ordnance hospital working in pediatrics. He mentioned the situation in pediatrics, saying that once they did regenerative medicine, they used a large syringe and needle to extract the liver from a newborn baby, and then injected it into the liver of a patient with cirrhosis or liver failure. That was their regenerative medicine practice. Of course, the final outcome was that after the baby's liver was removed, they killed the baby and told the family that they had given birth to a stillborn child. He switched from surgery to pediatrics only to discover how they treated fetuses, especially when their organs or tissues were needed. Everyone knows that during that period, the CCP shut itself off and did everything themselves. So I asked Dr. Zhang, is this effective? He said it seemed quite effective. Of course, fetus livers contain many stem cells and progenitor cells, which we all know. No other country, often a physician, could do this. Back then, the Communist Party handled many things behind closed doors in China. Later, we learned about their methods. Over the years, I've often talked about this. Regardless of organ transplantation or regenerative medicine, they have their own ideas. They have a longevity project called Project 981. Starting with Mao Zedong, they've been thinking about how to make this leader live forever. Of course, it was very difficult in the past because technology wasn't so advanced. Later, with the reform and opening up, a large number of Chinese doctors went to Western countries to learn new technologies. Global pharmaceutical companies and doctors around the world had extensive exchanges with the CCP. A large number of patients came to China with this need, and so on. So what was once a problem within China, closed off, has now become a problem for all of humanity because everyone is involved. The same goes for regenerative medicine in China. In the early days, they couldn't even make a name for themselves in replicating technology. Later, they went to the West to learn Western technology extensively. They were very smart and learned very well. Finally, they brought it back to China, and the whole development was very rapid. So, as mentioned earlier, Jet Li's case is more like a result of regenerative medicine. As for how they do it and what a final product looks like, frankly, we haven't done that. Therefore, we don't know what drugs he received or how it was done. It involves a great deal of their development, which is why Xi Jinping said he could live to 150. I think our thinking about regenerative medicine is different from the CCP's. Our thinking is that the need arises because patients are sick, and we hope to use regenerative medicine technology to help them rebuild tissues and alleviate their suffering. For the CCP, their thinking is about how to make the rich, powerful, and resourceful young again and live longer. Where these tissues and organs come from and where these raw materials come from is not their focus. This leads to Mao Zedong saying, it is like having 9 fingers. Today, the CCP is proud that its organ transplants and regenerative medicine are actually superior to those of the United States and Western countries. As for who is sacrificed, that is not a topic to discuss because no one in China cares about that issue. What they care about is the level of their technology.
Then our member, Dr. Lin, asked if the main point of this lecture was to tell everyone to have a normal transplant, so as not to encourage unhealthy practices. Is that the point? I think that is the main point.
I think it should be said this way. I think for the people of Taiwan, there are 2 points. Of course, for us, we can only say that we are doing normal things because Taiwan does not lack normal transplants. But mainland China is a different matter. Secondly, in fact, we also hope to let more people know about this matter because we specifically mentioned that the tragedy of Nazism after World War II was due to ignorance and indifference. In fact, I feel that in the past, Chinese people were very indifferent to the organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners. They all thought that they should not become Falun Gong practitioners. Later, it gradually spread to other ethnic groups, and today many hospital patients are in danger. Look at China now. These things are frequently discussed on their own Weibo, Xiaohongshu, and social media groups. Chinese people are starting to feel a sense of crisis. Even the nurse we just saw spoke out, saying that when these things happen, you'll gradually tell the people around you to be careful. After a few years, as the news spreads, people are afraid to talk about it openly, but they all know in private. Everyone is very scared. Many people say, don't go to the hospital if you are not sick. Many people know this, and Chinese people are starting to feel very nervous. I think many people in Taiwan used to be very indifferent to the organ harvesting in mainland China, and many legislators were also very indifferent. It wasn't until recent years when many legislators discovered that they were being asked by voters to save their children who were being tricked into going to Cambodia and Myanmar. And then organ harvesting began to spread from Cambodia and Myanmar that they started to get nervous. They wondered how it could spread to Southeast Asia and neighboring countries. So from the beginning, Pastor Martin told us that when evil is not stopped, everyone will suffer in the end. Therefore, I hope more people know these facts. Only when everyone knows can we curb the development of these things. For Taiwan, there are two aspects. One is that Taiwan will definitely have a normal transplant because we are very clear about the ethical regulations and everyone will abide by these norms. The second aspect is that we hope more people will know about the CCP's atrocities.
Another member, Dr. Shi, asked how to convince his friend that the issue of state-owned organs is real and not AI generated.
I think this matter should be put this way. In fact, I gradually realized that many of the reports in Taiwanese media about internal affairs in Taiwan are false. Because Taiwan is so free, you can spread rumors without consequence. You need to understand that people in mainland China face the risk of being persecuted for whatever they say. This includes Dr. Zhang Zhe and Annie, who told her story. She said that her husband was involved in the organ harvesting from 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners. When they wanted to leave China, her husband suffered from insomnia for a period of time. He couldn't sleep and started discussing with his father, a high-ranking official, hoping they wouldn't continue. Her father was also a high-ranking official, and her husband was the child of a CCP martyr. The Communist Party selects its own people to do these things, its own soldiers. She specifically mentioned that when they wanted to leave China, the process of being persecuted was extremely frightening for them. So after Dr. Zhang Zhe fled to Canada, he hid for 18 years, only daring to speak publicly about these things in 2023. He hid for 18 years, terrified. I told my doctor, I think even doctors can understand those 3 sentences Huang said. His first sentence was, many things shouldn't be explained too clearly. Some things you'll understand if you think about them. Finally, he said, you understand. So don't tell me you don't know where the organs came from. They were all given by Zhou Yongkang. Zhou Yongkang was the one who persecuted Falun Gong. Don't tell me you don't know the organs were harvested while the people were alive. Everyone knows that. Otherwise, how could they harvest organs? So, to put it simply, it might seem hard to imagine, but if you look at the history of the Communist Party's rule over China, whether it is the Cultural Revolution, the 3 anti and 5 anti campaigns, or the anti-rightist campaign, and how they've harmed the people along the way, I think you'll understand their entire thought process hasn't changed. It was just that it was more semi-public before, but later, because of increased international exchange and the need for international technology, they had to do these things covertly. Yet, many Chinese people still speak out, risking their lives to do so. There are still many clues, and we can still find out in many places that these things happen.
One of our members, Dr. Liao, asked whether there was any research in development technology abroad regarding implantable artificial kidneys.
In fact, there has been continuous progress in this area. We all know that there are never enough kidneys, so there are 2 main points. First, of course, we hope to find ways to prevent kidney failure in our population. This is our greatest wish. Therefore, everyone must protect and take good care of their health. Second, artificial kidneys are under development. Many 3D technology advancements are being implemented, including animal and genetically modified kidneys, etc. However, these are not yet mature. Currently, the only options are dialysis and kidney transplantation. As for the liver, regenerative medicine is also developing with technologies like stem cells and cell culture, aiming to improve liver function. As Dr. Zhang Zhe mentioned earlier, their initial approaches were not very effective. So liver transplantation is still necessary. Of course, technology is also advancing, and preventative medicine is also very important.
Our last question was from Dr. Jiang. who asked whether Taiwan could follow other countries' lead and restrict the national health insurance coverage for a type of medication used for post-organ transplant care.
In fact, we've been discussing this issue for a very long time. Starting in 2006, when this issue first surfaced in 2006, the first person with a strong sense of justice was President Lai. He repeatedly raised this issue in the Legislative Yuan, discussing how we should restrict our citizens from receiving transplants from countries with unclear organ sources. Of course, at that time, the goal was to prohibit transplants from countries with unclear organ sources, etc. But how could we restrict this? After a long discussion, the Ministry of Health and Welfare eventually agreed to require mandatory registration. You must register in the system upon returning to Taiwan to receive anti-rejection medication. They didn't dare directly restrict national health insurance, NICE payments, because they were worried about backlash. After all, there is another voice in Taiwan that denies any illegal activities by the CCP. So regarding NI, this has been under discussion for a long time. Some countries prohibit it. There are many countries that prohibit it. Because Taiwan's NI was initially mandatory, they kept saying that Taiwan's NI was mandatory, so they couldn't restrict it. This is still under discussion.
Dear members, do you have any other questions?
Movie introduction. Sure. In fact, we still hope to get more people, especially more doctors, to pay attention to this issue, because this is something I often mention. It is a very important issue for the medical community. The beginning of the 21st century started with organ harvesting. This started in 2000, at the beginning of this century, and it is on a very large scale. It is not just about harvesting organs from Falun Gong practitioners. It will eventually spread to other groups. As I just mentioned, this includes regenerative medicine and many other fields. In fact, you'll gradually learn about many things involved. For the public, the biggest feeling recently has been that after COVID-19, people felt that the CCP was hiding information, that its information was not transparent, and that people couldn't even figure out where the virus came from. The harm to humanity is enormous, and that is when people started to feel it. I think the people of Taiwan could feel it during SARS, but Westerners didn't. Only people in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And we Chinese felt the horror of the CCP's cover-up. Western countries started to feel it slowly with COVID-19. But as Michael Pillsbury said, in fact, businesses, academia, and media all over the world have invested in China. So we hope to let more people know this information. In fact, these things are not against China, but against the Communist Party. Ultimately, we still have to rely on the awakening of the Chinese people themselves. The more awakened the Chinese people are, the more important it is to know what kind of regime the CCP is.
We thank Director Huang for giving us such a wonderful speech. It was the first time I had ever heard of the CCP's many evil deeds. We are very fortunate to be born in Taiwan, and I hope everyone can pay more attention to this matter.
One more thing I'd like to mention is that I think older people probably remember a movie called Cold Wave, which was made by the Kuomintang and specifically mentioned the evil of the CCP. In fact, I remember there was a story behind it. The background of Cold Wave was that Chiang Kai-shek had passed away, and people from other provinces started wanting to return to China. General Wang Xiang felt that this wouldn't do. How could they forget the brutality of the Communist Party so quickly? So he made a movie called Cold Waves to awaken the memories of people from other provinces. I remember after that film was finished, the director showed it to an anti-communist activist and said, "Look how well I did. We made it very successfully." The people of Taiwan, and even those in Southeast Asian countries, have remembered how terrible the Communist Party is. After watching it, this anti-communist activist told the director, "You can tell you are just making a movie." The director asked, "How do you know?" He said, "There is a scene where a person wears a sign that says, 'I am a demon and monster,' and is being criticized during the Cultural Revolution. He is criticized for 8 or 9 hours a day. You know, the Communist Party signs are made of stone, not a rope, but a steel wire. It is worn on his head every day, digging 3 centimeters into his skin, bleeding for 9 hours a day," he said. "You don't know. The Communist Party persecutes people to the point of death, making you wish you were dead." In fact, the Communist Party is extremely brutal to the Chinese people. If you've lived through that era, you'll know that. It is just that in the last 20 or 30 years, because the whole world has entered China and interacted with the Communist Party, more problems have arisen. and many things that were unimaginable before have happened one by one.
Thank you, Director Huang, for your introduction. Today's topic is quite serious. Please remember to fill out this questionnaire online later. It is a post-class quiz and will also allow you to earn valuable ethics credits. Thank you, Director Huang, for such a wonderful presentation. That concludes today's meeting. Thank you, everyone.